My mother made me go to school at a very early age. I was only 5. There was no such thing as, in those days, there was no such thing as kindergarten or preschool or something like that. But the government rules were that children were enrolled in school in the year in which they turned 6. But my mother worked at somehow, and I was enrolled in the primary school in the year that I turned 5. And whether it set me back or not, I don't know, but I wasn't that good a student. I never loved school. And anyway, I went right through to what they call matric, and this was right until the beginning of the Depression in 1933. And I was going to become an electrical or mechanical engineer, be a Bachelor of Science in electrical or mechanical engineer. I enrolled in university, at the Witwatersrand University, and I dropped out after 9 months because it was because of the Depression, and I wasn't that much in love with school, as I said before. And I knew that my brother was very keen, and we both couldn't go to university at the time on account of the Depression. So I was very keen to go and earn a living, which was the reason why I dropped out. And I joined a firm in the wholesale business in the centre of the important part of the wholesale section of Johannesburg, where I was very lucky to get a job, and I was the main costing clerk for the factory, a very large men's clothing factory, which was around the corner of the big business in the centre of Johannesburg. I was there for about 3 years, and one of the large firms, chain store Woolworths, a South African chain store Woolworths, which had nothing to do with any overseas Woolworths, and had branches in Cape Town and Durban, opened up in Johannesburg, and I was offered a job to join the firm because the managing director and the main managing director and builder of Woolworths was a relation of our family, and he realised he would like to get some of the family into the business, and I was offered a much, much larger salary that I was earning in the wholesale and the clothing factory. So I joined the Woolworths, and I was there for 3 years until the war broke out. And I was a member of the South African Army, a regiment called the Rand Light Infantry, but I was a member in 1936 to do my army training, which was compulsory for 3 years. That meant a monthly camp, an annual monthly camp, and once a week on a particular night, every week there was a regimental drill and so on in Johannesburg. At the end of the 3 years, I was asked by the commanding officer to please stay on in the regiment, because the regiment was a very famous regiment from a point of view of marksmanship and shooting, both machine gun, rifle, etc. And I for the first 3 years that I was with the regiment, I spent every Sunday morning at an army shooting range, perfecting my shooting. I became an expert shotist. So I was asked to stay on for another year. This is before the war. Towards the end of that year, war broke out. And I stayed on with the regiment. And I was a corporal at the time. And eventually I remained in the army, because of the war and the fact remains that Germany was the opposition. Many Jews joined up to fight the enemy. I personally remained to fight, or to stay in the army and to fight against Germany, but not for England. It was purely, in my point of view, I fought against Germany. That's why I was still in the army. The regiment was eventually sent to North Africa, where we joined Field Marshal Montgomery and the 8th Army. We were part of the 8th Army, and in one of the battles, I was in charge of 2 mortar sections, 4-inch mortars, for which expel a 20-pound bomb for at least almost a mile. And we were quite expert on it. And the regiment had 9% Jews. When the 9% Jews, they were all whites. Where the rest of South Africa, the Jews were only about 3% of the whites. So the Jews were very patriotic in that respect as regards fighting against Germany. During one of the campaigns, I was ordered by messenger from the commanding officer to eradicate a machine gun nest which was holding up an attack. And I refused. I told the messenger to tell the commanding officer that we can't do that because the bombs that we send out are devastating we were too close to the enemy, and it would kill too many of our own troops. So I refused to do that, and I said I would see what we could do without sending bombs. I managed to get rid of the machine gun nest, and in the ensuing participation or action, I was wounded. I had a bullet through the hand and a bullet in the chest. And I was rushed off to hospital, a field hospital, and I was then flown in a plane to a South African tent hospital a few miles away. And I was eventually sent home. I had to go for physical therapy for disabilities and so on for about 18 months afterwards, until I was discharged in 1943. The original mobilization to going outside of Johannesburg to north was in 1940. In June 1940. Switch off.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me just think about now what happens. Oh, right. when she came back, as I say, I was sent back by ship to Johannesburg, and I was attending physiotherapy rehabilitation for almost 18 months. And during that time, it only took an hour or hour and a half attention every day, but I remained, I was still in the army, and I remained doing physiotherapy and helping the army in the hospital. So I became quite an expert as a physiotherapist. When I was discharged in June, strangely enough, exactly the same day, in June 1943, I rejoined Woolworths, who were paying part of my salary to the wife while I was in the army. They sort of made up the difference between the army pay and my pay, which was very magnificent to them. I remained with them for about 6 or 7 months, and somebody came to me, a member of the, and suggested to me that we go into business, because with the war was still on, and with my army career, I would get a license to purchase machinery and whatever, which was denied the general public because of the war, the shortage of the war. And we would manufacture goods which were not available on account of the war. So I landed up for a couple of years until the war ended with a couple of partners and a factory. When the war ended, the government just allowed goods to come from overseas, ignoring the local people, the local factories, and the fact that we're going to have opposition from overseas. So we gave up the factory, and I went back to work, but not for Woolworths. It wouldn't be fair to go to Woolworths, so I joined with some other firm, and eventually I was offered a position. While I was with this other firm, I was offered a position to become a partner in a business in a suburb where they needed somebody who was knowledgeable of that kind of business, and the partner would just supply the finances for it. So I joined this little shop in a suburb, and I built it up until I was there for 40 years in a suburb. The shop was a soft goods business which specialised mainly, or didn't specialise, but I made it a specialty of supplying school uniforms for the schools in the area of the suburb. The whole point is that in South Africa, all the schools wear different uniforms. It's a sort of, it's a wonderful thing, because it gives a chance for parents who can't afford a change of clothing for everything. There is equality for everybody if they wear school uniform, and besides, it was sort of an adoption and an adaptation from the English way of doing education, which was the South African way of doing education, which is very, very good. I was there for 40 years, very successful. It was a small business, but successful. In that time, in 1945, I purchased a house in a suburb called Amarentia, and It was about 12 miles from the centre of town, a very nice suburb, and my son was born in 1944. I got married in 1939, by the way, just before the war. And the reason, that is just before the war was declared. It was 3 months or 4 months after war was declared I got married. But the arrangements had been arranged 6 months before war was declared. So we didn't put off the wedding. And it means that I actually went to camp from my honeymoon. I went for a month camp. And it's only when I came back from the army that I had a son, born in 1944. His name was Darrell Lester. And I remained in South Africa for 90 years. For my 90 years, until I was 90. And my son went to America. He was very successful in South Africa. He went to the 1960s. He was on the very first plane from South Africa to help Israel in 1967, the 1967 war, and he remained overseas. He remained in Israel for 9 months or so. Then he went via England, where he spent some time, and he eventually landed up in Canada. There's quite a thing which he will probably tell in his taping or something. And he got married in Canada, where he and his wife then came to South Africa almost immediately. We didn't go, my wife and I did not go to the wedding because we thought he was coming to South Africa in any case, and we would rather give him the money we would spend for the trip. When he comes to South Africa, he's got a start in life. So they arrived in South Africa, and he was very, very successful in South Africa, and a director of a large firm there, connected with the business that he was in insurance mainly, offered him a position in America in 1978 and in Dallas, which he accepted with the offer that he would get a green card immediately and that he would be recompensed for his travelling expenses, etc. So that's how he landed up in America by beginning of 1979, and I didn't visit him. I did not visit him until 1990, when I was 75, and then I came almost regularly to America, to Dallas. And my wife died in 1996, but I remained in the house until 2006, when my son said I should come to America, and I landed up in America. And that was my story.
Okay. Leo, would you like to elaborate about your Jewish affiliations in South Africa?
Oh, yes.
Did you belong to a
Yes.
synagogue?
Yes.
Orthodox
Now,
or
I'll tell
conservative?
you, as I say, I should have waited until you were asking a question. I can tell you about my mother's, my affiliations as regards Jewishness. My mother was my family was Orthodox. And My mother particularly was a wonderful organizer. She used to have children's classes at home teaching us about Israel, about Palestine, before it was Israel. She taught us other children as well. She taught us Hebrew songs, so on and so forth. She was a founder member. She actually founded the Society for Women, the Mizrahi Society in Johannesburg. She was an organizer, and she helped to organize the formation of a Jewish orphanage in South Africa, which was a very, very elaborate business. It was a wonderful home in a very posh suburb. And she became chairman of the house committee of the orphanage for very many years. She helped to form committees in different suburbs, half a dozen different committees, which were responsible for getting membership to support the orphanage, and for these committees to organize fetes and meetings for the charity part of the orphanage.
So you were raised Orthodox then, right?
Sorry, they were. I said they were Orthodox.
So you observed all holidays, everything. You observed all the Jewish holidays in your home.
Oh yes, very well. I said Orthodox society.
Kosher.
South African Jews were Orthodox.
Okay.
There were only two kinds of Jews in South Africa. There was the Reform, which was a very mild form of Orthodoxy, and they were the total at its height. The Reform section was probably about 10% of the Jewish population. The Jewish population of Johannesburg, the average before the exodus from South Africa, all the Jews, because of the apartheid business and their concern about the future of South Africa for their children, the young people left South Africa in hordes, went for all over the world. And that's probably one of the reasons why my son went to America. And the Reform congregation, it said, was at the most 10%. The the Jewish population in the main were all observant, Orthodox, either Sephardic or Ashkenazi, mostly Ashkenazi, very much so.
Did you go to Hebrew school as a child?
They had Hebrew schools. They didn't have, in those days, they didn't have yeshivas or anything. There were Hebrew schools, but not, and they were not co-educational. They were 90% boys only. And as the years went on, as today they got famous yeshivas and seminars for girls and so on and so forth. But as far as I know now, there was never co-educational. Whereas in the Enish, as regards the Enish teaching of children normally, Gentiles and so on and so forth, over the years they eventually became co-educational. Otherwise it was, as far as Johannesburg was concerned, there were 5 or 6 high schools, entirely boys or entirely girls. And as the years went on towards 1960 or so, they gradually became, as a new school started, they became co-educational.
I see. Leo, I am sure that, what year did you come to Dallas?
I came to Dallas in 2006.
6. You're new here then, relatively speaking. Did you find a great cultural difference here in Dallas as compared to Johannesburg, Jewish community?
Yes, from a point of view of schools, the education was terrible. Here in Dallas, it can't compare to South Africa. But America's got that, most of America, not all the states, some states have super education, I've discovered. But in the main, the general setup is, it isn't set up to have good education because each state is a country on its own.
That's right.
Whereas in South Africa, all the provinces are governed by the single government, and they got the laws and rules and so on apply to the whole country. There's they have no separate selection of what to do. They have the same curriculum, the same education, the same exams, etc. There's a complete difference.
Complete difference. So coming here from South Africa was a complete cultural difference here.
Absolutely.
Yes, in many ways, in many ways.
It's very comparatively inferior, much inferior. Well, the results are there. I mean, the fact remains that there are some wonderful things happening in America, but that's because of the large population. There has to be large people. Texas in particular is very good that way. It has a wonderful reputation for inventions and so on, especially industrially. I mean, the invention of the microchip, which has revolutionized the world, was invented in Texas, in Dallas, by a man named Jack Kilby. And so Dallas has a reputation for that sort of thing.
Okay, in concluding questions, throughout your life, have you had
I'd like to mention early on that if ever you visit South Africa, anybody visits South Africa, especially my great-grandchildren and so on, I was born in, the address was 5 Clare Road, Fordsburg. And it's still there as far as I know. It was there until I left South Africa, so I presume the house is still there. And I lived in that house until 1938, when we moved to Emmarentia, to Greenside. And then the war broke out, as I say, and I moved on.
Okay. You have had a great life, Leo, and I'm very honored to do your interview with you. And in concluding question, who are your role models, or what are you most proud of in your life? Any particular person that was a significant role model for you growing up in Africa?
No, not really.
Not really, okay.
The only thing is that as I grew up, I didn't realize at the time, but as the years went on, after about 50 years, I realized that I was developing a fantastic memory, which I never used or realized I had. I could never remember names or anything like that, so much so that when I went to high school, the high school had an offer. They wanted the students to learn a lot about the classics. And they suggested or made an offer that if you took Greek for the 5 years that you're supposed to be at a middle school or high school, you could drop two subjects, and the two subjects that you could drop were history and geography, which being Jewish, I dropped immediately into Greek. Greek has been very useful to me in that it improved my English. There's so much of English, and for that matter, Hebrew, which is derived from Greek. Greek is considered a holy language for the Torah in Orthodox circles.
That's
from the
interesting.
time of from the time of the Babylonian era, because Greece was the cultural center of the world. So much so that every Roman who wanted to become knowledgeable went to Greece to study. And that's how the Rambam, who was a wonderful follower of Aristotle's philosophy, he didn't know Greek at all, but he learnt about Aristotle's philosophy from Arabic. The Arabians considered Aristotle a brilliant man too, and he learnt his Aristotle philosophy from his knowledge of Arabic. And his knowledge of Arabic was the Rambam, that's Maimonides. He was brought up from the age of 13 to the age of 23. He was brought up in Morocco because he and his father, who was a brilliant man, Maimon, his father's name, was a rabbi of Cordova, and they had to leave Spain because either they had to convert or they were sentenced to death, or they had to emigrate. And he emigrated with his father, of course, when he was 13 to Morocco, where he had a wonderful secular education, which is the wonderful thing about the lucky thing of his that made him so brilliant is the secular education of the Rambam, Maimonides.
Maimonides is one of your role models there.
Yes.
A very, very significant person, I must agree.
Yes, to a certain extent. Not so much a role model, as I learned a great deal from his book, which translated is my mind going to blank.
The Principles of Judaism?
No.
No. Okay.
Let's switch off for a minute.
Okay, it's all right. It's okay.
A guide for the perplexed.
Perplexed. I see.
And there is one thing that's very important about Judaism. My view of Judaism is very much different to the sages of yesteryear. And the reason is not because I'm cleverer or anything like that, but I have more knowledge through the sciences of things which they had no idea about. For example, until 400 years ago, the world, the entire universe, no matter who it was, the entire universe thought or realized or thought that the center of the universe was the planet Earth, and that the sun and the moon orbited the Earth. And they had and everybody who saw the sun, the moon, and the stars were under the impression, even the very great Arabic astronomers who were very brilliant, thought that every object in the sky was a disk, not a sphere, not a ball. Although in Maimonides' Guide for the Text, he talks about the sphere of the moon and stars, but he only knew it as a disk, so much so that they all wondered what the thickness was, were the discs paper thin or miles thick or whatever. And until Copernicus, who was a Hollander, worked out that the not a disk, but it was a sphere, it was a ball. And he improved the telescope. He didn't discover the telescope, he improved the telescope. And he also adopted and explained that the sun was the center, and that everybody else, the whole system, the planets all orbited the sun. And for that, he incidentally, his uncle was an archbishop of Rome, and he was condemned for heresy, so much so that he was condemned to death for his heretic thoughts and suggestions. And eventually he was made to retract his statements, but in the end, and he was confined to what they called house arrest, and that's when he eventually died. But it was through Galileo that we got our knowledge. Now, that's my point about the sages, and nobody else knew about these things, and that was 500-600 years ago. Subsequently to that, the next great discovery, which was only 250, 260 years ago, was the discovery of oxygen by Priestley, who happened to be a priest as well, although his name was Priestley, but he was an amateur scientist, an amateur astronomer, and he wasn't the only one. There was, coincidentally, there was a Swede by the name of Schuller, who also discovered the same way by the heating of potassium oxide, which gave off a gas. And they called the gas, I don't know who came with this name, but they called it fire air. And they are both acknowledged as the discoveries of oxygen. And why I mention oxygen is because, and the sages, is because in the Bible, God breathed breathed something into the nostrils of Adam. So that must have been oxygen. And my view is this, that mankind is alive because there is a life force which God has given everything. Not only man, a life force has given men everything, and the life force is fueled, kept alive by oxygen.
Right.
And it applies to every single living thing on the planet. That includes blood cells.
Right.
It includes everything, but it has to have oxygen.
Absolutely.
So life is three things. The whole of the universe is three things. It's the life force, oxygen, and friction. Nothing can exist without friction. You wouldn't be able to hold anything. You wouldn't be able to
Right.
be anything without friction. And these are the three things, and this is something which the sages, no matter how brilliant they were, couldn't know until oxygen was discovered.
Right.
And that's why when I say that science is a help, not because the sages were ignorant, but they just didn't know.
That's right.
That's my view of
Okay.
Yiddishkeit.
Okay, Leo, thank you so much. You have given such invaluable information in your concluding part of your interview. I'd like to take your picture, okay? Hold on. Would you look at me now? Okay. Thank you, Leo.
Okay. There's something I didn't mention. It doesn't have to be on it at all. But
Go-
because I
Go ahead.
disobeyed an army order, I was given an award.
Good. Good.
And I've got the military medal, which is given for battlefield experience.
That's great. That's very good.
And this was published, this was published in the, it was an immediate award, but it was published officially in the London Government Gazette of the 3rd of March, 1942.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much, Leo.
Okay.
It was an honor to have you here.